The autumn wind carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves through Clifton Hill, Arizona territory, and Beatrice Sullivan thought she might finally understand what peace felt like as she dragged her rake across the hard-packed earth outside her boarding house. It was October 1883, and the cottonwood trees that lined the dusty Main Street were shedding their golden leaves like tears, carpeting everything in amber and rust. She gathered them methodically, precisely, creating neat piles that stood like small monuments to order in a world that seemed determined to remain chaotic. Beatrice had arrived in Clifton Hill 6 months earlier, a 22-year-old widow with nothing but a trunk of clothes and the deed to a ramshackle boarding house her late husband's brother had felt obligated to leave her. Thomas had been dead 2 years now, killed in a mining accident back in Pennsylvania, and she had spent those 2 years living with his family, feeling like a ghost in their home, until the letter came about the property. She had left within a week, hungry for a place where she could build something of her own, where every surface did not remind her of what she had lost. The boarding house had been a disaster when she arrived. 3 rooms upstairs, a kitchen and common room downstairs, and enough dust and debris to convince her that no one had lived there in years. But Beatrice had strong hands and a stronger will, and she had scrubbed and swept and painted until the place gleamed. She had sewn new curtains from fabric she bought at the general store, planted herbs in wooden boxes outside the kitchen window, and set about making the kind of home she had always imagined but never quite achieved. Now she had 3 steady boarders, an elderly prospector named Caleb who told the same stories every night at dinner, a school teacher named Miss Henrietta who kept to herself and always paid on time, and a young clerk from the assayer's office who was saving money to bring his sweetheart out from Missouri. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to live on, enough to feel like she had purpose. She was gathering the last pile of leaves when she heard the horse. Beatrice had learned to distinguish the sounds of Clifton Hill in the months she had been there, could tell the difference between the stagecoach arriving and someone just passing through, could hear in the rhythm of hoofbeats whether the rider was local or a stranger. This was a stranger, and when she looked up, she saw him. He sat astride a paint horse, a man in his mid-20s with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of desert sage. His hat was pulled low against the afternoon sun, and he had the lean, weathered look of someone who spent more time under open sky than under a roof. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something between amusement and curiosity. "Help you with something?" Beatrice asked, leaning on her rake. She had learned quickly that women alone in the territory needed to project confidence, even when they did not feel it. The man dismounted with easy grace, looping his horse's reins around the hitching post in front of her property. Up close, she could see the dust of long travel on his clothes, the stubble on his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners like he smiled often. "Heard in town you might have a room available," he said. His voice was low and pleasant, with an accent she could not quite place. "Name's Fletcher Bishop. I'm looking to stay a while, work some at the copper mines if they are hiring." Beatrice considered him carefully. She had turned away 3 potential boarders in the last month, men whose eyes lingered too long or whose manner suggested they saw a widow running a boarding house as an opportunity rather than a business arrangement. But there was something different about Fletcher Bishop. He met her gaze directly but not aggressively, and he kept a respectful distance. "I have 1 room left," she said finally. $30 a month includes breakfast and dinner. No drinking in the rooms, no disturbing the other boarders, and you keep your own space clean. I'm not a maid service." "Fair terms," Fletcher said. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, counting out bills. I can pay 2 months in advance if that suits you." It suited her fine, though she tried not to show how much the security of 2 months' rent meant. She took the money, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the pocket of her apron. "Rooms upstairs, last door on the right. I'll show you." She propped her rake against the porch railing and led him inside, conscious of his presence behind her as they climbed the narrow stairs. The boarding house smelled of the bread she had baked that morning, and the lye soap she used to scrub the floors. She had hung dried lavender in bunches from the ceiling beams, and the afternoon light filtered through the curtains in soft patterns. "This is it," she said, pushing open the door to the room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a chair by the window. "Breakfast is at 6, dinner at 6 in the evening. You miss it, you are on your own. Privy is out back, and there is a pump in the yard for washing up." Fletcher set his saddlebags on the bed and looked around the room with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "This is real nice, Miss Sullivan, Beatrice Sullivan, but folks call me B." "Well, Miss B, I appreciate the hospitality." He turned back to her with a slight smile. "And I appreciate the neat piles of leaves outside, too. Place looks real cared for." She felt heat rise to her cheeks and was annoyed at herself for it. "Order matters," she said simply. "Especially out here where everything wants to fall apart." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that seemed to go deeper than her words. "I expect you are right about that," he said quietly. That evening at dinner, Beatrice introduced Fletcher to the other boarders. Caleb immediately launched into a story about his prospecting days in California, and Miss Henrietta offered a polite nod before returning to her meal. The young clerk, whose name was Robert, asked Fletcher about where he had come from and what had brought him to Clifton Hill. "Been moving around mostly," Fletcher said, accepting a second helping of the stew Beatrice had made. "Worked ranches in Texas, did some trail driving up to Kansas, tried my hand at farming in New Mexico. Figure the mining work here might be steadier if they will have me." "Copper mines always need men," Caleb said sagely. "Long as you don't mind working hard and working deep." "Hard work never scared me," Fletcher replied. "It is the other things that tend to be trouble." Beatrice, serving coffee, wondered what he meant by that but did not ask. She had her own past she did not discuss freely, and she extended the same courtesy to others. Over the next week, Fletcher settled into a rhythm at the boarding house. He found work at the Longfellow mine, one of the larger copper operations in the area, and he left each morning before dawn, returning in the early evening covered in dust and exhausted. But he always cleaned himself up at the pump outside before coming in, always thanked Beatrice for the meals, and always kept his room neat as a pin. She noticed other things too. The way he would sit on the porch in the evenings, playing a harmonica softly enough not to disturb anyone. The way he helped Caleb up the stairs one night when the old man had too much whiskey at the saloon. The way he fixed the loose board on the porch steps without being asked, and reinforced the chicken coop, where Beatrice kept the hens that provided eggs for breakfast. "You don't have to do that," she told him one afternoon, finding him working on the coop. She had been raking leaves again, a seemingly endless task as the cottonwoods continued to shed. "Want to," Fletcher said, hammering a nail into place. "You keep a good house here, Miss B. Feels right to contribute beyond just rent. You work hard enough at the mine," she pointed out. He straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "That is for wages. This is different. This is about belonging to something." The word hung between them like a question. Belonging. Beatrice turned back to her raking, uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy of the conversation. She had spent 2 years feeling like she belonged nowhere, and she was only just beginning to feel like Clifton Hill might be home. The idea that someone else might be searching for the same thing unsettled her. But over the following weeks, she found herself noticing Fletcher more and more. The way he moved, economical and sure. The way he listened when people spoke, really listened, his full attention on them. The way he never complained about the work, never spoke roughly to anyone, never seemed to lose his temper even when Caleb told the same story for the 100th time. One evening in early November, after the dinner dishes were cleared, Fletcher found Beatrice on the back porch, looking out at the mountains that rose like dark sentinels against the sunset. The air had turned cooler with the season, and she had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. "Beautiful out here," Fletcher said, leaning against the porch railing. "Different from Pennsylvania, I imagine." She glanced at him, surprised. "How did you know I was from Pennsylvania?" Robert mentioned it. "Hope that is all right." "It is all right," she said. "And yes, it is very different. Greener there, more trees, but also more crowded, more noise. I like the space out here. Feels like you can breathe." Fletcher nodded. "I know what you mean, been a lot of places, and there is something about this country. Harsh sometimes, unforgiving but honest. You know where you stand." "Where are you from originally?" Beatrice asked. It occurred to her that for all the weeks he had been staying at the boarding house, she knew very little about him. Colorado, mostly. Father had a ranch outside of Durango, small operation, cattle and horses. His voice had gone quieter, and she sensed there was more to the story. "He died when I was 16, and my mother followed a year later, sold the ranch to pay debts and been on my own since." "I am sorry," Beatrice said, and meant it. "It is hard to lose family." "You lost someone too," Fletcher said. "It was not a question, my husband. Mining accident, 2 years ago now." She was surprised at how easily the words came. She rarely spoke of Thomas anymore. "We were only married a year. And you came all the way out here alone." "His family meant well, but I could not stay there. Everything reminded me of him, and I felt like I was just waiting for my life to start again. The boarding house gave me a reason to move forward." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the evening darkening around them. Then Fletcher said, "Can I ask you something, I suppose? Why do you rake the leaves every day? I have seen you out there making those neat piles, and the next day there are more leaves and you rake them again. Why not just let them lie?" Beatrice considered the question. It was something she had not really examined herself, just something she did. "I think," she said slowly, "because it gives me control over something. The world is messy and unpredictable, and people die and plans fall apart, but I can rake those leaves into neat piles. For a little while, everything is ordered and right. Does that make sense?" "More than you know," Fletcher said. His voice had a rough edge to it, something raw. "I have spent 8 years feeling like I am just drifting, going wherever the work is, never putting down roots because I figured there was no point. But watching you here, the way you care for this place, the way you make order out of chaos, it makes me think maybe I have been doing it wrong." Before Beatrice could respond, he straightened and looked at her directly. "Rake me into your tidy world, Miss B. I know that probably sounds strange, but I have been untethered for a long time, and being here, being around you, it is the first time in years I have felt like I might want to stay somewhere." Her heart was beating too fast, and she felt suddenly warm despite the cool evening air. "Fletcher, I do not know what to say to that." "Do not say anything yet," he said gently. "Just think on it. I am not going anywhere." In the days that followed, Beatrice found herself acutely aware of Fletcher in ways that both thrilled and frightened her. She caught herself listening for his footsteps, looking up when he entered a room, finding excuses to be where he was. And she noticed that he seemed to be doing the same, their paths crossing more often than coincidence would suggest. One afternoon, she was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when he came in from work earlier than usual. Mine is closed for the day, he explained. Some equipment broke and they are fixing it. You are welcome to rest, Beatrice said, her hands working the dough in rhythmic motions. Dinner will not be for a few hours yet. Actually, I was thinking I might help you with something if you would let me. She raised an eyebrow. Help me with what? Those leaves. I figure between the two of us we could rake them up faster, maybe get ahead of them for once. Beatrice laughed, a sound that surprised her with its genuine happiness. Fletcher, those leaves are never going to be finished. The trees will keep dropping them until they are bare. I know, he said, smiling, but maybe that is the point. Maybe it is not about finishing. It is about the doing of it. So they raked together, working in tandem, him gathering the leaves into piles and her perfecting them, creating neat rows along the edge of the property. They did not talk much, but the silence was companionable, easy in a way that Beatrice had not experienced in years. She found herself stealing glances at him, watching the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt, the concentration on his face as he worked. When they finally stopped, the yard looked immaculate and the sun was beginning to set. Fletcher leaned on his rake, surveying their work with satisfaction. That looks right, he said. It does, Beatrice agreed. Then, before she could stop herself, she added, Thank you, Fletcher, for helping. For understanding why it matters. He turned to her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. B, he said quietly, I want you to know something. I meant what I said the other night. Being here with you, it is the first time I have felt like I found something worth holding on to. I am not asking you for anything you are not ready to give, but I want you to know how I feel. She wanted to tell him that she was not ready, that it was too soon, that she was still mourning Thomas and could not imagine opening her heart again. But the truth was more complicated than that. The truth was that Thomas had been gone for 2 years, and the grief that had once consumed her had faded to a dull ache. The truth was that she woke up every morning looking forward to seeing Fletcher at breakfast, and went to bed every night thinking about his smile. The truth was that she was already halfway to falling in love with him, and it terrified her. I am scared, she said finally, the words coming out in a whisper. I am scared of losing someone again. I am scared of caring too much. Fletcher set down his rake and took a step closer, though he did not touch her. I am scared too, he admitted. I am scared that I will mess this up, that I am not good enough, that you will realize you could do better than a drifter who has been running from himself for 8 years. But I also know that being scared is not a good enough reason to walk away from something real. Is this real? Beatrice asked, looking up at him. We have only known each other a few weeks. Sometimes that is all it takes, Fletcher said. I have known people for years and never felt like I knew them at all. But you, B, I feel like I know you. The way you care for things, the way you make order out of chaos, the way you are strong even when you are scared. I see you, and I think I have been looking for you my whole life. Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes and she blinked them back. This is not fair, she said, trying to smile. You are supposed to be just a boarder. I know, Fletcher said, and he smiled too, that gentle smile that made her heart ache. Life rarely works out the way we plan it. That night, Beatrice lay in her bed unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling and thinking about what Fletcher had said. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had planned together that had been cut short. She thought about the last 2 years, the grief and loneliness and slow rebuilding of herself. And she thought about Fletcher, about the way he made her feel alive again, about the possibility of a future she had not dared to imagine. By morning, she had made her decision. She found him at breakfast, sitting at the table with Caleb and Robert, eating the eggs and toast she had prepared. When he looked up and met her eyes, she gave him a small nod, and she saw understanding bloom in his face. After the other boarders had left, Fletcher helped her clear the table as he often did. "B," he said as she was washing dishes, "about what we talked about yesterday." "I have been thinking about it," she interrupted. She set down the dish she was washing and turned to face him, drying her hands on her apron. "And I think you are right. Being scared is not a good enough reason to walk away from something real. So if you meant what you said, if you really want to be part of this, part of my world, then I want to try." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, warm and brilliant. "I meant every word," he said. "I want to be here with you for as long as you will have me." "Then stay," Beatrice said simply. "Just stay." He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and took her hands in his, and for a moment they just stood there, connected on the threshold of something new. Then, very slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and when they broke apart, Beatrice was smiling. "I want to do this right," Fletcher said. "I want to court you properly, take you to dinner, maybe take you to the dance they hold at the church hall on Saturday nights. I want everyone in this town to know that you are important to me." "I would like that," Beatrice said. And she would. After 2 years of being invisible, of being just the widow who ran the boarding house, she wanted to be seen again, to be courted and cherished and treated like she mattered. Over the next few weeks, Fletcher proved true to his word. He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, the nicest place in Clifton Hill, and she wore the blue dress she had been saving for a special occasion. He took her to the Saturday dance, and they moved together across the floor while the fiddler played, and the other townspeople watched with interest and approval. He brought her wildflowers he picked on his way home from the mine, and he helped her plant a garden for spring, turning over the hard earth while she planned what to grow. Miss Henrietta, the schoolteacher, pulled Beatrice aside one afternoon. "I hope you do not mind me saying," she said in her precise way, "but it is lovely to see you happy. You have done so much for all of us here, and you deserve to have someone care for you." Even Caleb, who was usually oblivious to anything that did not involve prospecting or whiskey, noticed the change. "That Fletcher is a good man," he told Beatrice one evening. "Reminds me of myself when I was young. Hard worker, honest, treats people right. You could do worse, B." "I know," Beatrice said, smiling. "I am lucky." But it was not just luck, she was beginning to realize. It was choice. She was choosing to open her heart again, choosing to trust, choosing to believe that happiness was possible even after loss. And Fletcher was making the same choices, committing himself to her and to the life they were building together. By December, the cottonwood trees were bare, and the first snow had begun to dust the mountains. Clifton Hill settled into the quieter rhythm of winter, with shorter days and longer nights. Beatrice and Fletcher spent their evenings by the fire in the boarding house common room, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting together in comfortable silence while he played his harmonica, and she mended clothes or worked on her sewing. One evening, with the snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, Fletcher said, "B, I need to tell you something." She looked up from the shirt she was mending, concerned by the serious tone in his voice. "What is it?" "It is about why I left Colorado, why I have been drifting all these years." He was staring into the fire, his hands clasped between his knees. "I told you my father died when I was 16, but I did not tell you the whole story." "You do not have to tell me if you do not want to," Beatrice said gently. "I want to," Fletcher said. "I need to because if we are going to do this, really do this, you should know." She set aside her sewing and gave him her full attention. "My father was a good man," Fletcher began, "but he made some bad business decisions. Got in debt to some men who were not patient about getting paid back. When he could not pay, they came to the ranch. There was a fight and my father was shot. He died right there in our yard, and my mother just. She could not survive it. She tried for my sake, but the grief was too much. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and within a year she was gone too." "Oh, Fletcher," Beatrice said softly, her heart aching for him. "I sold everything to pay off the debts," he continued, "but I could not stay there. Every day I woke up and remembered what had happened, and I felt like I had failed them somehow, like if I had been stronger or smarter I could have saved them. So I ran. I worked ranches and trail drives and farms, and I never stayed anywhere long because I figured I did not deserve to put down roots, did not deserve to be happy when they were gone." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But then I met you, and for the first time in 8 years, I felt like maybe I did deserve something good. Maybe I could stop running and start living. You make me want to be better, B. You make me want to be the kind of man who stays, who builds something, who takes care of what he loves." Beatrice rose from her chair and went to sit beside him, taking his hand in hers. "You are that man, Fletcher. You already are. What happened to your parents was not your fault. You were just a boy, and there was nothing you could have done differently." "I know that in my head," Fletcher said. "But my heart took longer to believe it. And now?" Beatrice asked. "Now I think I am finally ready to stop punishing myself," he said. He turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. "I love you, B. I know it has only been a few months, but I love you. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you rake leaves into neat piles. I love the home you have made here, and I love the way you have let me be part of it. And if you will have me, I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "I love you too," Beatrice said, the words coming easily now, naturally. "I love you, and yes, I will have you. I want to build a life with you, Fletcher. I want all of it." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and when they broke apart they were both breathless and smiling. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Clifton Hill in white, covering everything in a fresh start. 2 weeks later, on a cold December morning with the sun shining bright on the snow, Fletcher Bishop and Beatrice Sullivan were married in the small church at the edge of town. Miss Henrietta and Robert and Caleb were there, along with a handful of other townspeople who had come to know and care for the couple. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed his bride with such joy and tenderness that more than one person in attendance had to wipe their eyes. They held a small reception at the boarding house, with food Beatrice had prepared over the previous days and music provided by a trio of miners who played guitar and fiddle and banjo. They danced in the common room, Fletcher holding Beatrice close while she rested her head against his chest, and she thought that this was what happiness felt like, this certainty, this peace, this sense of being exactly where she belonged. That night, they lay together in the room that had been Fletcher's but was now theirs, wrapped in each other's arms beneath warm quilts. "I never thought I would have this again," Beatrice murmured. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over." "I am glad it is not," Fletcher said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I am glad you gave me a chance, gave us a chance." "So am I," Beatrice said. She thought about the path that had brought her here, the grief and loss and slow rebuilding, and she thought about how sometimes the worst things in life could lead to the best things, if you were brave enough to keep moving forward. As the weeks turned into months and winter gave way to spring, Fletcher and Beatrice settled into married life. He continued to work at the mine, and she continued to run the boarding house, though now they worked as a team, sharing the responsibilities and the rewards. They planted the garden together, and when the vegetables began to come in, Beatrice preserved them for winter. They fixed up the boarding house even more, painting the outside and repairing the roof, and adding small touches that made it feel even more like home. In April, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She had been tired more than usual, and certain foods that she normally loved suddenly made her feel sick. When she finally acknowledged what was happening, she felt a mixture of joy and fear. She had never been pregnant before, and the thought of bringing a child into the world both thrilled and terrified her. She told Fletcher one evening after dinner, when they were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. "I am going to have a baby," she said quietly. For a moment he just stared at her, and she worried that he was not happy about it. But then a grin broke across his face, huge and delighted, and he swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Fletcher said. He set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents. B, this is the best news I have ever received." Over the next months, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Fletcher built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving small flowers along the edges. Beatrice sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving with practiced precision. Miss Henrietta offered advice, having helped her sister through several pregnancies. And even Caleb became protective of Beatrice, insisting on carrying heavy items for her and telling her to sit down whenever she looked the least bit tired. In November, on a cold morning with frost on the ground, Beatrice went into labor. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen who had delivered most of the babies in Clifton Hill, arrived quickly and took charge of the situation. Fletcher paced in the common room, too nervous to sit still, while upstairs Beatrice labored to bring their child into the world. It was a long day, and by evening Fletcher was nearly out of his mind with worry. But then he heard it, the thin wail of a newborn, and Mrs. Chen appeared at the top of the stairs with a smile. "You have a son," she said, "a healthy boy, and your wife is doing well." Fletcher took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the bedroom to find Beatrice propped up against the pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. "Fletcher," she said softly, "come meet your son." He approached almost reverently, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and looking down at the small red face of his child. The baby had a dusting of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air, and Fletcher felt something crack open in his chest, a love so fierce and overwhelming that it took his breath away. "He is perfect," Fletcher whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Bea. Thank you for this." "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. They had discussed names over the previous months but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Fletcher said, "What about James, James Bishop? It was my father's middle name." "James," Beatrice repeated, testing the name. "I like it. James Bishop it is." The baby opened his eyes, and for a moment Fletcher could swear his son looked directly at him, as if to say, "I am here, I am yours, take care of me." And Fletcher made a silent promise that he would do exactly that he would be the father his own father had wanted to be, that he would give this child the safe, stable, loving home he deserved. Over the next year, James grew from a tiny newborn into a fat, happy baby who gurgled and laughed and kept his parents thoroughly exhausted. Fletcher would come home from the mine and immediately reach for his son, holding him and playing with him while Beatrice prepared dinner. At night, they would take turns walking the floor when James woke crying, and though they were tired, they were also deeply, thoroughly happy. The boarding house continued to thrive. Miss Henrietta had moved out when she married the town doctor, but they had found 2 new boarders, a young couple who were saving up to buy their own home. Caleb remained, now well into his 70s, but still spry enough to tell his stories and give unsolicited advice. Robert had finally brought his sweetheart from Missouri, and they had married in the same church where Fletcher and Beatrice had wed. One afternoon in the fall, when James was just over a year old, Beatrice stood outside the boarding house with a rake in her hands, gathering leaves as she always had. James was playing nearby, watched over by Fletcher, who sat on the porch steps. The cottonwoods were shedding their gold again, and she worked methodically, creating the neat piles that gave her such satisfaction. "You know," Fletcher said, watching her, "when I first saw you doing that, I thought you were the most peculiar woman I had ever met. Who rakes leaves into neat piles in Arizona territory. Someone who values order," Beatrice said, smiling at him. "Someone who values order," Fletcher agreed. "And someone who taught me that creating order out of chaos is not just about the leaves, it is about life. It is about taking all the messy, broken, scattered pieces and arranging them into something beautiful." Beatrice stopped raking and looked at him, at the man who had drifted into her life and chosen to stay, at the home they had built together, at their son playing in the dirt with single-minded determination. "Is that what we did?" she asked. "Arranged the broken pieces into something beautiful." "That is exactly what we did," Fletcher said. He stood and walked over to her, taking the rake from her hands and pulling her close. "You raked me into your tidy world, Bea, and I have never been more grateful for anything in my life." She kissed him, there in the yard surrounded by leaves, and she thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How you could lose everything and find it again in a completely different form. How you could be broken and still become whole. How you could be a widow running a boarding house and end up with a husband and son and a future full of possibility. "I love you," she said against his lips. "I love our life." "I love you too," Fletcher replied, "and I love our life. And I am going to love every minute of it, for as long as we both shall live." The years that followed were good ones, full of the ordinary joys and challenges of life. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved to help his father with projects around the boarding house and follow his mother as she worked in the garden. When he was 4, he got a baby sister, a dark-haired girl they named Caroline, who had Beatrice's eyes and Fletcher's stubborn determination. 2 years after that came another daughter, Rebecca, who was quieter and more thoughtful, content to sit and watch the world around her. The boarding house remained a steady presence in Clifton Hill, a place where people passing through could find a clean room and a good meal, and where those who stayed longer found something like family. Fletcher eventually became a foreman at the mine, overseeing crews and helping to improve safety conditions. Beatrice's garden expanded until it took up a 1/4 acre, providing vegetables not just for the boarding house but for several other families in town. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Beatrice to the same restaurant where they had gone on their first proper date. They left the children with Miss Henrietta and her husband for the evening, and they dressed in their best clothes and walked through the streets of Clifton Hill arm in arm. "You remember the first time I saw you?" Fletcher asked as they waited for their food. "You were raking leaves, and I thought you looked so serious and determined, like those leaves had personally offended you." Beatrice laughed. "I remember. You showed up covered in dust, asking about a room, and I was trying to decide if you were going to be trouble." "Was I trouble?" "The best kind," Beatrice said. She reached across the table and took his hand. "You changed my life, Fletcher. Before you came, I was just existing, just going through the motions, but you made me want to really live again." "You did the same for me," Fletcher said seriously. "I spent 8 years running from myself, and then I found you and realized there was nowhere else I wanted to be. You gave me a home, Bea, not just a place to live, but a real home with roots and purpose and love. We gave each other that." Beatrice corrected gently. "We built it together." They talked late into the evening, reminiscing about the early days of their relationship and marveling at how much had changed. 3 children, a thriving business, a place in the community, a love that had only deepened with time. It was more than either of them had dared to hope for. When they returned to the boarding house, they found Caleb sitting in the common room reading the newspaper. He was 80 now and his hands shook sometimes, but his mind was still sharp. "Children are all asleep," he reported. "Good as gold, all 3 of them." "Thank you, Caleb," Beatrice said warmly. The old prospector had become like a grandfather to their children, telling them slightly sanitized versions of his stories and sneaking them sweets when he thought no one was looking. Upstairs, Beatrice checked on each child, adjusting blankets and pressing kisses to foreheads. James, now 10, was sprawled sideways across his bed as usual. Caroline, 6, slept curled up with her favorite doll. Rebecca, 4, was in the middle, thumb in her mouth despite Beatrice's efforts to break the habit. Back in their own room, Fletcher wrapped his arms around Beatrice from behind as she looked out the window at the moonlit street. "Happy anniversary," he murmured. "Happy anniversary," she echoed. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Fletcher asked. "If I had ridden past your boarding house that day, if I had decided to stay somewhere else." "Sometimes," Beatrice admitted. "But then I think about how we found each other anyway because we needed to. Because there was something in both of us that was searching for exactly what the other person could give." "You think it was fate?" Fletcher asked. "I think it was choice," Beatrice said. "Fate might have brought you to my door, but we chose everything that came after. We chose to take a chance. We chose to trust each other. We chose to build this life together. And I would choose you again, Fletcher Bishop. Every single time." He turned her in his arms and kissed her deeply, and she felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt that first time, standing in the kitchen with dish soap on her hands and hope in her heart. As the years continued to pass, Clifton Hill grew and changed. More families moved in as the copper mines expanded. A second school was built, and a proper hospital replaced the single doctor's office. The railroad came through in 1895, making travel easier and bringing more commerce to the area. Through it all, the Bishop boarding house remained a constant, a place of stability and welcome in a town that was evolving. James, at 18, decided he wanted to study engineering. He left for school in Tucson, and Beatrice cried on Fletcher's shoulder the day they put him on the train, even though she was proud of him. Caroline, at 14, was already showing signs of being a talented artist, filling sketchbooks with drawings of the desert landscape and the people around her. Rebecca, 12, loved books and spent hours in the small library that had been established in town, talking about becoming a teacher like Miss Henrietta had been. Fletcher, now in his mid-40s, had silver threading through his hair, but he was still strong and vital, still working at the mine though now in an administrative capacity. Beatrice, 42, had laugh lines around her eyes and a few strands of gray she did not bother to hide. She still ran the boarding house, though she had hired a young woman to help with the cooking and cleaning. One autumn afternoon, 20 years almost to the day after Fletcher had first arrived in Clifton Hill, Beatrice stood in the yard with a rake in her hands. The cottonwoods were shedding again, and she was making her neat piles as she always had. It was a ritual now, something that grounded her and connected her to that younger version of herself who had been trying so hard to create order in her chaotic world. She heard the horse before she saw it, the same way she had heard Fletcher's horse all those years ago. When she looked up, she saw James, home from school for a visit, riding into the yard with a grin on his face. He had grown into a fine young man, tall like his father, with Beatrice's dark hair and Fletcher's green eyes. "Still raking leaves, Mama," he called out, dismounting. "Always," Beatrice said, embracing him. "It is good to have you home." "It is good to be home," James said. He looked around the property, at the boarding house with its fresh coat of paint, at the expanded garden, at the neat piles of leaves. "This place always looks exactly the way I remember it. You and Papa, you have created something really special here." "We tried," Beatrice said. "We wanted to give you and your sisters a good home, a stable place to grow up." "You did more than that," James said seriously. "You showed us what love looks like, what commitment looks like, how to take care of things, how to make something beautiful out of ordinary materials. Papa told me once about how he asked you to rake him into your tidy world. I think about that sometimes. How he was drifting and you gave him a place to land. How you were grieving and he gave you a reason to hope again. It is a good story, Mama, the best kind of love story." Tears stung Beatrice's eyes. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from the best," James said, hugging her again. That evening, with James home and the whole family gathered around the dinner table, Beatrice looked at each face and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Fletcher at one end of the table, still the steady, loving man she had married. James beside him, talking animatedly about his engineering studies. Caroline showing her latest sketches to Rebecca, who was offering thoughtful commentary. Even Caleb was still with them, now 88 and hard of hearing but still present, still part of their family. This was what she had built, she realized. Not just the boarding house with its neat rooms and tidy yard, but this family, this web of love and connection and belonging. She had taken her grief and her determination and her need for order, and she had created something that mattered, something that would last beyond her own lifetime. After dinner, she and Fletcher took their customary walk around the property, checking on things and enjoying the cool evening air. The cottonwoods rustled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "I was thinking," Fletcher said, "that maybe it is time for us to step back a little. Let the boarding house go, enjoy some time just for us. We have been working hard for 20 years, we have earned some rest." Beatrice considered this. The truth was, she had been thinking the same thing. The boarding house required constant attention, and she was not as young as she once was. "What would we do?" she asked. "Whatever we want," Fletcher said. "Travel, maybe. See some of the places we have always talked about. Spend more time with the children, work in the garden, sleep late occasionally." He grinned at her. "Rake leaves without it being a chore." "I do not know if I know how to do that," Beatrice said, but she was smiling. "The leaves have always been a chore, even when I enjoyed it." "Then we will figure it out together," Fletcher said. "Just like we have figured out everything else." They decided to sell the boarding house to the young couple who had been living there for the past 5 years. The couple had always loved the place and treated it with care, and Beatrice knew they would maintain it well. The sale gave Fletcher and Beatrice enough money to buy a small house on the edge of town, with a big garden and a view of the mountains. The transition was harder than Beatrice had expected. For 20 years, her identity had been tied to the boarding house, to being the woman who provided shelter and meals and a tidy, orderly space. But Fletcher helped her through it, reminding her that she was so much more than what she did for a living, that her worth was not measured in clean rooms and punctual dinners. In their new home, they created a different kind of life. Beatrice planted roses and herbs and vegetables, spending hours in the garden with her hands in the soil. Fletcher built furniture in a small workshop he set up in the barn, making chairs and tables and cradles for the grandchildren he hoped would come someday. They took trips to Tucson to visit James, and they hosted Caroline and Rebecca every Sunday for dinner. 2 years after they sold the boarding house, Caroline married a kind young man who worked as a surveyor for the railroad. The wedding was held in the garden of Fletcher and Beatrice's home, with roses in full bloom and the mountains providing a spectacular backdrop. Watching her middle child exchange vows, Beatrice remembered her own wedding, the simple ceremony in the little church, the feeling of starting fresh. "You are crying," Fletcher whispered, handing her a handkerchief. "I am allowed to cry at my daughter's wedding," Beatrice whispered back. "Of course you are," Fletcher agreed, though his own eyes were suspiciously bright. 3 years later, it was Rebecca's turn. She married the librarian she had been courting for 2 years, a quiet man who loved books as much as she did. They planned to stay in Clifton Hill and run the library together, expanding it and making it a true community resource. James, meanwhile, had finished his studies and returned to Arizona, though to Phoenix rather than Clifton Hill. He worked for an engineering firm designing bridges and public buildings, and he wrote long letters home describing his projects. In the spring of 1903, James sent a telegram announcing that he was engaged to a young woman named Sarah whom he had met through work. The wedding would be in Phoenix, and he hoped his parents could come. Fletcher and Beatrice made the trip, marveling at how much Phoenix had grown since the last time they had visited. The wedding was lovely, and Sarah was a sweet, intelligent woman who clearly adored James. "He did well for himself," Fletcher said on the train ride home. "All three of them did," Beatrice said. "We raised good children, Fletcher. We did that." "We did," Fletcher agreed, taking her hand. "We did a lot of good things." That summer, James and Sarah came to visit, and Sarah confided to Beatrice that she was expecting a baby. Beatrice, who was now 62, felt a thrill at the idea of becoming a grandmother. When the baby arrived in January of 1904, a healthy boy they named Thomas Fletcher, after both grandfathers, Beatrice traveled to Phoenix to help Sarah for a few weeks. Holding her grandson for the first time, Beatrice thought about circles and cycles, about how life continued and evolved. This baby was part of her and part of Fletcher, but he was also entirely his own person, with his own future stretching out ahead of him. She thought about Thomas, her first husband, the man whose name this baby carried, and she felt a sense of peace. She had loved Thomas and his death had devastated her, but she had not let that loss define her entire life. She had moved forward, found love again, built something beautiful. And that was not a betrayal of Thomas's memory, but a tribute to it, proof that the love they had shared had taught her that love was worth the risk. Fletcher came to Phoenix after 2 weeks to bring Beatrice home, and they traveled back to Clifton Hill together, watching the desert landscape roll past the train windows. "I keep thinking about that first day," Beatrice said, "when you rode up to the boarding house and I was raking leaves." "I think about that day all the time," Fletcher admitted. "It was the day my real life started." "Mine too," Beatrice said. "Isn't it funny how one moment, one decision can change everything? If I had not had a room available, if I had turned you away, if you had decided to try somewhere else." "But we did not," Fletcher said firmly. "We found each other and we made the choice to build a life together. And it has been a good life, the best life." "It has," Beatrice agreed. They settled into a comfortable routine in their later years. Fletcher was now retired from the mine, receiving a modest pension, and Beatrice had long since given up any pretense of working. They spent their days gardening, reading, visiting with friends and family. Caroline and her husband had 3 children. Rebecca and her husband had 2, and James and Sarah added 2 more in the years that followed. The Bishop grandchildren were a lively bunch, often spending summer weeks with their grandparents, running through the garden and listening to Fletcher's stories. Caleb had passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1905, at the age of 91. He had left his small savings to Fletcher and Beatrice, with a note that said, "Thank you for giving an old prospector a home." They used the money to establish a small scholarship fund for children in Clifton Hill who wanted to pursue education, honoring Caleb's memory in a way they thought he would have appreciated. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, Fletcher arranged a surprise party. All three of their children came home, bringing their families, and the house and garden were filled with people and laughter and love. There was a cake and toasts, and Fletcher stood up to speak. 30 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his 64 years. I was a drifter with no home and no hope. I rode into Clifton Hill looking for work, and I found so much more. I found this woman who was brave enough to let a stranger into her life and her heart, who taught me that it is never too late to start over, that broken things can be mended, that love is always worth the risk. B, you have given me 30 years of happiness, 3 beautiful children, and more love than any man deserves. I thank God every day that you were raking those leaves the afternoon I rode up. There was not a dry eye in the crowd, and Beatrice stood and kissed her husband while everyone applauded. Then it was her turn to speak. Fletcher told me once to rake him into my tidy world, she said. And I did, gladly. But what I did not understand then was that he would do the same for me. He would take my grief and my fear and my need for control, and he would help me arrange all those messy pieces into something beautiful. This life we have built, this family, this home, it is the neat pile we made together from all the scattered leaves of our pasts, and I would not change a single thing about it. As the party continued around them, Fletcher and Beatrice slipped away to their spot on the back porch, looking out at the mountains as they had done countless times over the years. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. "You ever miss it?" Fletcher asked. "The boarding house, the constant work, the purpose of it all." "Sometimes," Beatrice admitted. "But then I remember that purpose was not in the work itself, but in what the work allowed me to build. Connections, relationships, a place where people felt welcome. I still have all of that. It just looks different now." "Different but good," Fletcher said. "Different but very good," Beatrice agreed. They grew older gracefully, supporting each other through the inevitable challenges of aging. When Fletcher's arthritis made it hard for him to work in his shop, Beatrice would sit with him and read aloud. When Beatrice's eyes grew weak, and she could no longer see well enough to do the detailed sewing she loved, Fletcher learned to thread needles for her. They attended weddings and funerals, christenings and graduations. They watched the world change around them, with automobiles beginning to replace horses, electricity coming to more and more homes, the news of a great war in Europe. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, each other's comfort, each other's home. On quiet evenings, Fletcher would still play his harmonica, and Beatrice would still find satisfaction in order and tidiness, arranging things just so. But they had learned that the most important things in life, love and family and connection, could not be controlled or arranged. They could only be nurtured and treasured and allowed to grow in their own organic, beautiful way. In the autumn of 1923, 40 years after that first meeting, Beatrice stood in their garden with a rake in her hands. She was 82 now, and Fletcher was 84, and neither of them moved as quickly as they once had. But she still found peace in the ritual of raking, gathering the fallen leaves into neat piles. Fletcher came out to join her, moving slowly but steadily. "Let me help," he said, taking a second rake from the shed. They worked side by side, as they had done so many times before, creating order out of chaos. The cottonwoods were shedding their gold, just as they had been doing that long-ago day when a cowboy rode into town looking for a room and found a whole life instead. "Do you remember," Beatrice said, pausing to catch her breath, "what you said to me that day? When you first saw me raking?" "I do," Fletcher said. "I asked you why you made such neat piles, why you did not just let the leaves lie where they fell. And I said it was about control," Beatrice remembered, "about creating order when everything felt chaotic." "And now?" Fletcher asked. Beatrice looked at the neat piles they had created, at the garden they had tended together for so many years, at the home they had built, at the life they had shared. "Now I think it is about love," she said. "About caring enough to make something beautiful, even if it is just a pile of leaves. About taking the time to do things right. About making a space for the people you love to feel safe and welcome and cherished." Fletcher set down his rake and pulled her close, careful with their old bones. "You raked me into your tidy world, Sullivan Bishop, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you raked me right back into yours," Beatrice said, resting her head against his chest. "And it was the best thing that ever happened to me." They stood there in the garden, surrounded by the neat piles of leaves and the life they had built. Two old people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and made the choice to love each other through everything that came after. And as the sun set over the mountains and the evening air turned cool, they went inside together, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next, knowing that as long as they had each other, they had everything they needed.